Good morning, everyone. This is the Shanti part of Isha Upanishad. Every Upanishad has a Shanti part, which is like the signature idea that the entire Samhita from which the Upanishad is taken represents. So, Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate means that is complete, whole. Purnam is complete. This is complete. From complete, if complete is taken, complete remains. So this is talking about that infinity. Because if you take away 5 from 5, then 5 does not remain. 0 remains. So what is it that when you take away completely from it, it still remains? For those of us who are students of mathematics, we know that infinity plus infinity is infinity. Infinity minus infinity is infinity. So this wholeness, this purna, is what the signature idea is of the Yajnavalkya Samhita or Vajasanei Samhita as it is called, which is a part of the Shukla Yajurveda from where this Isha Upanishad has been, which is a part of. And Yajnavalkya was the rishi who composed it. And we say composed, we don't say wrote. And we'll come to this why. So it's called Yajnavalkya Samhita because Yajnavalkya composed it. It's also called Vajasanei Samhita because Vajaseni was Yajnavalkya's father. And in Sanskrit, we say somebody's son, like Arjuna is called Kaunteya because he was Kunti's son. So Vajasaneya is Vajaseni's son. And that is why this is Vajasaneya or Yajnavalkya Samhita of Shukla Yajurveda. And though it is Vedanta or it's a part of the Upanishads, but it is one of those earlier Upanishads which still retain the flavor of the Vedas. So we will quickly touch upon this whole knowledge system. As you know, there are 4 Vedas, the Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda. These Vedas were experiences which were codified by the seers. And the Vedas had 4 parts to them, the Samhita, the Aranyaka, the Brahmanas, and the Upanishads. So each of the 4 Vedas have a Samhita. Samhita is where the mantras are, the prayers. The Aranyakas are the rituals or the action that goes with that mantra. The Brahmanas are commentaries on those actions or rituals. And the Upanishads are the philosophical essence of that particular, Veda. So this is how each of the 4 Vedas have these 4 components. And there are Upanishads are all across the Vedas. And Isha Upanishad is part of the Yajnavalkya Samhita. Now, coming to the Upanishads, just to give you a broader outlook, there are thousands of Upanishads. But what are considered as Upanishads, which are the main ones, 108. And out of those 108, there are 10 or 12 which are actually studied because the main recovery of this text happened in the 8th century AD when Shankaracharya, in his Bhashyas, he interpreted these Upanishads. So out of these 108, he interpreted 10 of the Upanishads. And recently, in the last century, Sri Aurobindo also had wrote his commentaries on these Upanishads, and he wrote commentaries on the 13 Upanishads. So the main, I will tell you the names of these Upanishads. So the first one is always considered Isha Upanishad. It is called a Mukhya Upanishad. It is the Upanishad which the understanding or the studies of Vedanta begin for the student. The others are the Kena Upanishad, the Katha Upanishad, the Mandukya, Mundaka, Prashna, Taitiriya, Aitiriya, Brihadaranyaka. These were the 10 that Shankaracharya wrote his commentaries on, and Sri Aurobindo, and also Chandogya. And Sri Aurobindo added 2 more or 3 more, Sveteshvatara, Kaivalya, and Nila Upanishad. So my understanding of the Upanishads have been through the worldview and philosophical interpretation of Sri Aurobindo. So while I will touch upon Shankaracharya's interpretation too, because Sri Aurobindo himself studied Shankaracharya's bhashyas when he composed them, but our treatise or this understanding of Isha Upanishad will be based on Sri Aurobindo's interpretation. So Isha Upanishad is the one we are going to take up today. And each of these Upanishads, like be it 10 or 108 or 1000, what was their inquiry? That is important to understand. Now, what is it that they were trying to uncover? And that is that they were trying to uncover the Brahma Vidya. And why then we have 108? Because each one, that truth, the Brahma Vidya, is not a linear reductionist worldview that we have today. It is a holistic 360-degree worldview. And there is not one approach to it. And that is the basis of understanding in what we call Sanatan Dharma, or loosely called Hinduism today, which accepts and recognizes that there is not one approach to that truth, because the truth is multifaceted, it is 360 degree. So each of these Upanishads entered that portal of Brahma Vidya through its own approach. Now, some began with the big questions of who is the Brahman, and like Isha Upanishad, it starts with this grand problem of what is this world, who is this Brahman, why is there suffering on earth, what is the purpose of human being to be here, what is life, what is action, what is the purpose of it all. So this bigger questions is what the Isha's mode of inquiry is into Brahma Vidya. Similarly, Kena and others have their own points of inquiry from which they begin, but everybody ends in Brahma Vidya. Now, having set this introductory stage, I would like to move on into the details of the Isha Upanishad, which is our the study in the next 4 sessions. So Isha Upanishad is the shortest Upanishad. It has just 18 verses. But these 18 verses encompass the entire, Indian philosophy that we know of. And Mahatma Gandhi once said that if India were to lose all its texts, sacred texts like the Vedas and Upanishads, but just retain the first verse of Isha Upanishad, it would retain its entire spiritual knowledge. That's how powerful Isha Upanishad is. And these 18 verses have in them 4 movements. And over these 4 sessions, we will take up these 4 movements. So the movement 1 is verses 1, 2, and 3, which we will cover today. The movement 2 is verses 4, 5, 6, and 7 that we'll cover tomorrow. The third movement are verses 8 to 14, 7 verses, which we will cover next Saturday. And movement 4 has 4 last verses, which we would complete the study with. Now, one thing to be important to be understood when we are studying Vedas or Upanishads is that these were not texts to be philosophically understood, but these were insights born out of deep reflection, intuition, meditation, and experience of the rishis. And their purpose can only be served if we make it living in our lives. Otherwise, it would just be a knowledge and a point of view that we would have gained, but it would not be transformative. It would not change us. So, if possible, after every movement, we would have like a 5 to 7 minute of practice every day, so that these truths get distilled into our consciousness and become a part of us. So, the first verse says that Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam Yat Kinche Jagatyam Jagat Tena Tyaktena Bhunjitha Magridha Kasyasvid Dhanam. So here uh, the Upanishad is called Isha because the first word of the first shloka is Isha. And Isha is the Tritiya Vibhakti, third Vibhakti. I will not go into the Sanskrit of it. If those of you are interested, you can text me separately and I would answer your questions. But we would not go into the technicalities in Sanskrit, but more at the import and the practice of it. But Isha, it's important to understand grammatically, is the third Tritiya Vibhakti Ek Vachan, which is by the Lord. It means by the Lord, Isha. And that is why this Upanishad is called Isha Upanishad. So, Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam means that all this, Sarvam is everything. Vasyam is to be inhabited. Vas root has two meanings. One is to dwell in, inhabit, or to cover, to drape. So all this here, the first chunk of the verse says that all this here is for the inhabitation of the Lord, Isha. And we will understand what is Lord and everything in the second movement. Okay. Yat kinche jagatyam jagat. So sarvam is later on qualified. What is all this? What has to be inhabited by the Lord is qualified in the next part of the verse is Yat kincha jagatyam jagat. All that is moving in this moving universe. Jagat is from again root gam, which means to move, and it is reduplicative word, which is Jagat means the world, and Jagati is the feminine material energy that moves the world. So all that moves in this moving world has to be inhabited by the Lord. Tena tyaktena bhunjitha. Therefore, renouncing, by that renounced, enjoy all. Tena is by that renounced. Tyaktena, tyakta is to renounce. Bhunjitha, enjoy. Magridha kasyasvid dhanam. Do not run after possessions. Now, I have to tell you something about how the Upanishads are structured. So, the Upanishads were not written by kindergarten rishis who were, building step by step their, thought process. These were flashes of experience and intuition that they were coding. That is why these are called these are drishtas or shrutis. Shruti means that it is heard by them, like Mozart could hear music. He didn't compose it, it just came to him. Similarly, the rishis did not use their logical reasoning to write these verses. It is not that clever poetics here at work, but these were flashes of intuition, and these were heard or seen. Drishti is you see it, like the benzene molecule was seen, like a snake biting its tail. So that is how the scientist, I forget his name, came to that molecular structure, because he was working on it and it just appeared to him. So these are drishtis or shrutis. These are heard or revelations or inspirations. Drishti is a revelation, you just see it, and shruti is an inspiration. So these verses were inspirations, and therefore you will find that there are transitions of thought. It will not be a very linear thought of what we are. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, our minds are trained at very linear way of thinking. But similes and symbolism don't work like this. When we use symbols, it is just a flash of intuition. And it is how we interpret it and bring it all together. So now we will interpret this first verse, that all this is for the inhabitation of the Lord. And what is all this? All that is moving in this moving universe, which means that even at that time, the rishis were aware of the swirling galaxies, of Milky Ways, of everything is in movement and change. That what looks is not stable. It is always moving, be it the atoms at the quantum level, everything is moving. And all this is for the inhabitation of the Lord. So, why does it say next that tena tyaktena bhunjitha, by renouncing all, enjoy all? Because when everything is in motion and change, can you really enjoy it? Because whatever you start enjoying, it will go. If it is a pet that you start loving, the pet will die one day. If it is a mango tree that you like, it will, come and go. Relatives, friends. So nothing is we can hold on to. And that is the cause of our suffering. So by renouncing all, only we can enjoy all. Because when you are not renounced, then you are looking for something, you want it, and you're not happy till you get it. But after you get it, also, are you happy? No, because you have the fear of losing it. So it is only by renouncing that we can enjoy. And do not, kasyasvit dhanam has two meanings, other people's wealth, but Shankaracharya also gave another meaning to it, that the question mark, kasya, whose wealth is it anyway? Do not possess, because whose wealth is it anyway? And it says that all the wealth is Isha's, of the Lord. And who are you in your highest? Are you this fragmented ego individual self? Or are you also Isha in your true self? So, what is the better way to possess everything? Is it through this limited egoistic self to hoard things, buy things, keep it? Is that a way to own everything? Or is it is to become Isha? It is to become our highest self, the Lord. Because then, anyway, all this is to be inhabited by the Lord. All this is for the enjoyment of the Lord. And then you are naturally, you possess it anyways. So, this is the first verse. So, we go through it again. And one of the most important points of Isha Upanishad is that it reconciles the opposites. It is a beautiful treatise. There are 9 sets of oppositions, eternal oppositions, which Isha seamlessly reconciles. And in the first verse, what it reconciles is about Jagat and Isha. So Isha is the Ishvara, is the conscious Lord on one hand, which is eternal, immutable. And the other hand, it is phenomenal nature, Jagat, the world, which is forever changing. So on one hand, we have the permanent, the infinite, the eternal, the conscious Lord, the Brahman, the Lord. On the other hand, there is the world, which is forever changing, prone to mutations, decay and suffering. How do the two meet? There is this classic question: if God created the world, why is there so much suffering? Right? And if there is God, then who's permanent, then why is this nature? So the first verse reconciles the Lord, who is eternal, and the nature that is forever changing, by saying that nature is nothing but a manifestation of the Lord, which he has to inhabit anyways. So nature is an expression of the Lord himself. So then you won't ask that question that if Lord made everything, why are we suffering? Because we are not suffering. It is the Lord that is here suffering. Right? So the opposition of Lord, which is permanent, and nature, which is changing, is reconciled in this first verse with this grand synthesis that all this is for the inhabitation of the Lord. There is no other purpose of this world and universe. And since we are part of it, there cannot be any other purpose for us other than this. And how do we therefore become one with that? to grow into a highest, because we are not a Isha. We are not this ego-ridden body, mind, and emotions. But we are truly that eternal consciousness, that Isha. And once we become that, this whole world is for our enjoyment, and we would not need to possess externally things, because we will grow into that oneness, that cosmic oneness, where we will be enjoying everything. And for that, this inner renunciation is the key, the renunciation of the ego, of my individual self, into that larger cosmic and transcendental existence. Because only by renouncing this ego, by renouncing, can I enjoy all. Because why it is important to understand that why do we have fear or greed? Fear or greed is because we have, there is a perception of another. Who will I fear? I will not my dear ones, right? I'll only fear another. But when we grow in consciousness and there is no another, because we see ourselves in everybody and everybody in us, and that is the Isha consciousness, then there is no fear. Similarly, why do we want to hoard or possess? Because we think it is other than us, and therefore we want to us to belong to us. Like you're walking in a garden and there is a flower. If you feel that that is somebody's garden and I should have that flower for my house, you'll pluck that flower and you'll bring it to your house. You want to possess it. But if you feel that that neighbor's house is also your house, because that neighbor is also another form of, that same Brahman who is there, and then you will leave the flower there, because you can enjoy that flower in that person's garden also, because he is not a separate person. He's your being. So when we grow out of our self, ego self, into the Isha self, into the Lord self, which is the cosmic consciousness, which is related to everything, then we naturally renounce and truly begin to enjoy, because there is neither a need to desire to have nor the fear of losing. And then the whole world becomes a occasion for the Lord to inhabit. So this is the first shloka, the first mantra of the Isha Upanishad. The second one, it says that kurvanne veha karmani jiji vishet shatam samaha evam tvai nanyathe tosti na karma lipyate nare. So it says that kurvanne veha karmani, doing verily works in the world, jiji vishet shatam, 100, samaha, one should wish to live for 100 years. By doing work in this world, you should wish to live for 100 years. It is only through this and not otherwise that karma will not stick to man. Again, on the surface of it, these look disjointed ideas, but they not only have a complete coherence within the verse, but they also have a follow through of the verse before. So in the first verse, we have decided that we have to renounce to enjoy, and all this is for the inhabitation of the Lord. And you have this freedom from desire to possess, because all is Isha's anyway, and you are highest self Isha. Now, when you are in that state of liberation, why would somebody want to do work? Because if there's no desire, then to what end are we working? If we look at ourselves, why is action done? It is to fulfill a certain desire, right? We need a certain lifestyle, so we do a certain studies and we take up a certain job, or we want to do something. So all our action has behind it a desire. The first shloka now says that you renounce all, you renounce desire. And the second shloka is saying then do work. So the question may come that why would I want to do work? Why would anybody do work if there's no desire? Right? And when I'm in that state of liberation, why would I come down in this world of suffering and do the work? It's like you're staying in, a Taj West End in Bombay or someplace. Why would you go to Dharavi and the slums and work? You are in your nice palace, right? So the state of liberation, when you're renounced, it is a very blissful state. So why should you come down? So that is where beautifully the Rishi says that after you have renounced all, that is when truly you can do work, because that work is then sacred work. Before that, you are just doing to fulfill your needs and your desires. You are not doing the true work. But only after you're liberated can you do work. So kurvan ne veher, and you should wish to live for 100 years, because when you are liberated, like Ramana Maharshi was asked that, now that you're liberated, why don't you come to the world and do work? He says, I neither have the inclination nor, I think he said, energy or time to do it, because it is such a blissful state to be in. Why would you want to come and work? But Isha says that once you're liberated, wish to work and wish to live for 100 years. And it says that only then and not otherwise, karma will not get attached to you. Now, this is something to be understood about how karma works. So, you know that there is this philosophy which says that, or even Newton says, to every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So, whenever we do work, which is, there is a consequence. And then you have to, also fulfill that consequence. And then that has another consequence. And that keeps you in this, suffering of death and births. So there are some Indian philosophies which abstain from work. It says that, to be out of this karma, let me not engage in work. So we have several philosophies. But the Rishi here says that that is not the way to be liberated from karma and its consequence, because what is not karma? I mean, even when we are breathing, it is karma. We are eating, it is karma. We cannot, it is impossible to renounce work. But then what can be renounced is the intent of that work. Is that intent to fulfill my ego desire, or is it to be liberated and then work? And Isha Upanishad says that the only way that karma will not be attached to you is when you can work in this world and live for 100 years, but that work is not motivated by desire, but it is motivated by Loka Sangraha, as the Gita says. Loka Sangraha means goodness to society, where we live for a cause which is bigger than ourselves. It is not just our ego, it is a liberated self, renounced. And what does renunciation mean? It means that today, if you are in a position that you are staying, as I said, in Taj, you are happy and you offer it to the divine and you live there. Tomorrow, if you have to live in a slum, it does not affect you at all, your work, and you can still live there. That is true renunciation. It is neither having an obsession for pleasure, not having a repugnation for pain. It is not wanting to live in poor conditions for the sake of austerity. It is being free from whatever comes. Today, you have a 5-star dinner, you can enjoy it without inwardly having that greed of eating too much. And tomorrow, you have to have bread soaked in water, and you can have that too. But neither of the two states interfere with the work that has to be done. So this is the second shloka. And what are the two great reconciliations that this shloka does? So one is enjoyment and renunciation. We always feel that if we renounce, we cannot enjoy. But this shloka says that it is only in renunciation that there is true enjoyment. And true enjoyment cannot happen. So it seamlessly combines these two opposing, ideas of renunciation and enjoyment. And the third thing which it resolves, the opposite, is action and liberation. So action is supposed to keep us in this circle of life and death. Action or karma has always a consequence, and which then keeps you in this birth and death. But this shloka says that the only way to be liberated is through action. But action that is not motivated by desire, but that is motivated by through renunciation. Because when we do not have any personal agenda, when we do not have, only then we can truly receive the inspiration and do what is good. Otherwise, it is always tainted by personal agendas, as long as we are not completely inwardly renounced. So this is the second shloka of Isha Upanishad. And the first movement, which we are covering today, has the first three shlokas. And I'll now move on to the third shloka of the first movement, which says that Asurya namate loka andhena tamasavritaha tamste pretyabhigachanti ye ke chatmahano janaha, which means Asurya, sunless are the worlds. Asurya namate loka. Andhena tamasa, and filled with obscurity and darkness are the worlds. Tamste pretyabhigachanti, and they who are the slayers of their souls, they go to such worlds. Pretyabhigachanti, after death. So the Upanishad recognizes that it is not just we are born and we die and that's the end of the story. It wouldn't make any sense if we lived for 60, 70 years and then we go away somewhere. So a very important uh, point in Sanatan Dharma is the concept of rebirth. And that is very liberating, because if you have only 70 years to cram everything in it, then there's a lot of stress, right? We see there's a lot of stress in Western civilization. Everything has to be crammed in that one lifetime. But just imagine, it gave me such aram when we know that there are like hundreds of lives ahead. What's the big hurry? So rebirth, it gives you um, that patience, that it is not the end of the story. And the whole Bhagavad Gita has a chapter where it is about how the cloth is, we only shed the cloth and we move on to another context and carry on the task of evolution, and how every life is given so that we grow in a certain way. And it is such a liberating idea, this whole idea that you have forever, you have eternity to work out stuff. And what's the big rush, anyways? So this shloka is saying that those who are the slayers of their souls, atmahano janaha. And what does it mean, slayers of the soul? It means that the existence of those of us who are completely involved in materialistic pursuits without any opening of spiritual truth, Atman. Atman is that consciousness um, which is that one, with all. So we have in Indian thought system, we have three stages of beings. One is the transcendental. Transcendental is that which is beyond this manifestation and which has in it many other possibilities which today you don't see in manifestation. That is the transcendental self, the Satchidananda. And then there is the cosmic self of this transcendental, the cosmic consciousness, the nature, the phenomenal nature, the galaxies and everything. It is infinite. That is the second aspect. And the third is our individual self. So the whole of this Upanishadic, Vedic, and Vedantic psychology is this connection between these three selves, the individual with the cosmic and the transcendental. So why are the sunless the worlds of those who are in materialistic pursuits? Because even in simple day-to-day life, let's say I have a sister and she has a son and I have a son, let's say. And if I am in my limited ego self, that I'm only happy when my son is doing well, but I'm very jealous when my sister's son is doing better, then I'll be happy very few times and more suffering, because I'm always looking at myself as separate from that person. But if I consider her as my own, so I have doubled my joy, right? I'm also happy when her son is doing well, and I reduce my suffering. So the those who are the slayers of their soul means that they have an existence which is very egocentric, it is individualistic, and they do not, it is only the individual self that they are pursuing. There is no interrelatedness, there is no connection, there is no oneness with others, there is no growth of this individual self into the cosmic self and the transcendental self, which is the Atman. So the more we grow in our consciousness from individual self to these higher selves, there is more delight and beatitude and happiness and love, which are all the higher states. But the more we are focused only on our individual selves, our individual advancements, to the exclusion of others, we are the slayers of our soul, because the soul by nature is essentially linked with everything around it. So the lives of people that is spent in that um, egocentric material living, which where the soul is not given a chance to flower, such people go into worlds which are sunless and dark and obscure. That is the third shloka. Now, again, how is this related to second and third? We will understand when we take up the second and the third movement. In the second and third movement, each of these ideas will be further developed. So, to summarize what the first movement is, that the poet establishes the purpose of this world. The purpose of this world is that it has to be inhabited by the Lord. So the poet brings in the idea of Lord, okay, who is the Brahman. And the whole of second movement deals with who this Brahman is, who is this Lord. The verses 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, they are talking about the qualities of this Brahman. Who is this Brahman? So the poet in the first movement talks about how this is to be inhabited by the Lord. But who are we, anyways? Though we are seem to be part of nature, because we are also changing and moving in this moving universe. We are changing. We grow as children to adults, grow old and die. So we are part of nature. But then there is something in us which is also eternal, Isha. And that, when we grow into that identity, then we are renounced, because we anyway own everything, because all this is for the inhabitation of Isha, and you have become Isha. To give you an example of what this Isha is, we all know about milk, right? Many of us have become vegans these days, but when we grew up, it was, with the understanding of Krishna and his butter and all of that. And so milk has a shelf life for one day, right? It just goes bad. But if you make it into curd, maybe it lasts for 2-3 days before it goes bad. When you remove the cream lasts for a week to 10 days. Then the cream, when you make it into butter, lasts for a month, without going bad. And this butter, when it is heated, it gives you clarified butter, ghee as it is called in India, which lasts forever. It has a eternal shelf life. It never goes bad. And where was this ghee? It was in the milk, right? The milk that goes bad in a day. But it has in it the potentiality of the ghee which lasts forever. But there is a whole process that one has to go through to make this milk, which has one day shelf life, into ghee. And this spiritual life is nothing but that journey. It is that process, that how from this consciousness, which is divided, suffering, has a shelf life of 70 years, maybe maximum. We have a shelf life of 70 to 80 years. How from that milk, which is our mind, life, and body, can we extract the ghee, which is eternal and essential? And that was the cause and the symbolism behind that sacrifice. When ghee is poured on fire, it is not a physical kind of a activity that is happening. And we'll come to that action also, that why action was part of mantra, why, which later on we kind of discarded it as karma kanda. But why is action also important to go along with the understanding? So when we pour ghee on the fire, fire is representative of the will, the divine will in us, the aspiration in us. If you put water on fire or some log or whatever, you will see that it always has this aspiration to go up. Fire will never go down. So that is the aspiration in our heart, the divine will in us. And how is that strengthened? That is strengthened when you pour ghee, and ghee is that purified aspect of ourselves. When we purify our mind, our body, our emotions, and everything that goes out from us is that purified butter, and we pour that on the fire, which means that our work is always helping that fire to grow. That was the symbolism of the sacrifice. And when I say that how action is also important, a very easy way to understand it is, let's take the example of a very loving mother. Okay, and the mother has all the knowledge of how to bring up a child. But unless the mother also implements that knowledge, goes into the kitchen and makes nutritious stuff for the child, feeds the child with her hands with love, or stitches clothes for her, or changes the child's diapers, that knowledge has no value, right? Because it is not converting into action. So that action is what later on became karma kand. Because, but on the contrary, if the mother is doing all of that but without the knowledge, that is also equally bad. So knowledge and action always need to go together. And that is the reason, like for instance, if you have a mother who has all the knowledge but does nothing for the child, is not good. Or if you have a very capable babysitter who knows exactly how to do it but does not have that love and that thing for the child, it is also not as effective. But the combination of that love and then action is what actually brings that strength. So as they say that knowledge without action is lame, and action without knowledge is blind. So that is how we combine knowledge and action, and we'll come to this in third movement. Third movement talks about reconciling knowledge and action. And so this is where the first movement ends, where we are introduced to concepts of God and nature, and how they are not opposite, but how God or Brahman or Isha inhabitates nature. It is meant to do that. And how we can contribute in that process is by rising to being the highest selves. For that, we need to renounce action based on desire, but it has to be based on a larger worldview. And by doing this action, we should wish to live for 100 years, because when we have got enlightenment, and it is not enough that we escape into nirvana and leave our other fellow brothers and sisters here, we have to come and get our hands dirty when we have. So we have to live for 100 years. 100 is a symbol of wholeness again, completion. It is not like just 100. It means like to the fullness of your life. You have to keep doing work. When you're personally renounced for personal gain, then you have to keep doing that work. And it is only when we do work without motivation of personal ambition and greed, not by cessation from action, can we be free or liberated from action, but only when we do work without the motivation of self advancement and personal gain can we truly be free from the consequences of action and attain this liberation. And if we live our lives only focused on ourselves and are in personal egoism, and then we go to worlds which are dark and obscure, because every action has a consequence. And there is this concept of rebirth, that what we do in this birth affects how we are in our next birth, because it is not just this one life that we are here for. And So the first movement ends with this grand thought, and a very liberating thought. And I saw in the chat that there were a lot of questions people wanted to ask. So every day we'll have about 15 minutes where we take up questions.
Very important, which was part of the today's conversation. And secondly, should I ask the second one now? Or?
Yes, you can.
Okay, so I understand, and I am at that point where I understand that action is important, uh, because that's we all are like playing the character of Arjuna. That's what I feel, where we surrender to the Lord, and but we have
Yes.
to make our own action as well. So I'm personally looking at finding that balance where you surrender, where you are not the doer, and but you need to do that action. Uh, and out of these duties of the action, which is towards the nature and which is to the higher self, uh,
Mhm.
how should we also circumvent our societal responsibilities towards the family and our relatives and our friends? I'm not able to find that equation. So probably we can answer it today or probably at the end of the
No,
situation.
it's beautiful because this summarizes these three, the first movement, your questions. And it is very beautiful because there is a whole concept of dharma, of duty in the Bhagavad Gita also. And there are these stages of life where each dharma is at the forefront. Like the first 25 years when we are brahmacharya, it's the dharma to study, to build yourself, to build knowledge and discipline and all of that. The next is the dharma of the grihastha, where you have to take care of your families, of your parents, your children, and all of that, and so on. So action which is needed is sacred action. Okay, so if one has to be of use to one's friends, one's one has to contribute to the lives of people around us. Renunciation is the renunciation of the intent of desire. Okay, so I may want to do something for you, Rohit, because I feel, let us say, you want a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, and I meet you in a flight, and you are not able to get that copy, and you ask me if I can send it to you, if because I know where it is, and then I land and I get it and I send it to you. Now that is action, right? But how? What is renunciation in the action? That my work ends with that. Okay, it ends with that. It has no other expectation that if I ask you for a book, you will send it to me, or you will be thankful to me, or you will think that Gitanjali is such a nice person, you know. So when these motives come in the action, then it is not a renounced action, because there is a element of expectation. And this expectation can be from a very material expectation to very, very subtle. Sometimes this whole the ego plays a lot of games with us. We might be doing a lot of good work for society, and we might be thinking we are very good, but there'll be a very slight thing of ego that, see what a nice person so and so is, and respect in the society. So all of these need to be renounced. So renunciation is renouncing the intent of desire. So, and only when,
Which means letting go the desire. Which means
sorry.
letting go the desire. Which means letting go the desire.
Yeah. So like I gave you an example that if I look at myself, here is where this whole Isha consciousness helps. If I know that I am part of that consciousness and Rohit is that part of the consciousness, and just so happens that the world is designed in a way that we are symbiotic. Like what we give out, the oxygen, plants give us that oxygen, we give carbon. We are in a symbiotic relationship. As the African Ubuntu says, I am because you are. And it is a proven fact that actually I am because you are, because we are all connected. So if my intent is that, okay, I have this gratitude to the divine consciousness that I was, that you asked me to send this book, and I find it, I find a lot of gratitude in that I was able to send it, and it ends there. That is one way of being, right? There is no motive else. Similarly, all our work for our parents, for our children, for our friends, it can be done with the intent to grow Isha in everybody. Because Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam, because all this is for the inhabitation of the Lord. There's no other purpose of being. Anything else which is not growing towards the growth of Isha is not renounced action.
Beautifully explained. Thank you.
Yeah.
On similar lines, if uh, if I want to do a job well, uh, and I want to dissociate myself from the outcome of that job, that's renunciation. However, the concept of doing the job well itself includes the thinking that I need to focus on an outcome of that job, right? For example, if uh, uh, in my corporate job, say my company gave me a responsibility. Uh, I'll take a more realistic example. I need to hire 10 people by the end of next week. That's a target I have in mind right now, and I want to do it genuinely for giving opportunities to people, for helping the organization grow. But at the back of my mind, I know that if I do that well, my boss will appreciate me. There is some outcome linked to it. So my intelligence knows that already. So uh, similar to Rohit's question, I'm trying to reconcile this. Should I stay focused on the responsibility only? Uh, and if I'm reminded or motivated in some way or the other that if I do this well, there will be some consequence, good or bad. How do I dissociate myself? Is there some deeper thinking to be learned there, or is it just a simple thing I'm complicating too much in my mind?
No, it's very beautiful. The Bhagavad Gita deals with it in its chapter Karma Yoga. And there are 3 stages of renunciation, taking this renunciation discussion forward. So the first stage is the renunciation of the fruit, the immediate benefit, which I just, Rohit and I, we discussed. So it is called the phala tyaga. You are renouncing the fruit of action. So you're doing it because it has to be done. Okay. The second is the renunciation of the method. That is the second renunciation. These days, there's a very famous saying, my way or the highway. And, I want to do it. This is the way I want it to be done. So the second renunciation is also the renunciation of the method, of the way, because there can be many ways of doing it. And the third renunciation is the renunciation of instrumentation, that I am doing it. So when we grow in consciousness, you will begin to feel more and more that insight just came to you, like to the rishis. They didn't write their names on what they wrote because they felt that these were ideas, they just received it. So the whole instrumentation has to be renounced, that it's not I who did it. So these are the 3 stages. Now coming to your other question, that is pursuit of excellence, to be done or not done. So again, yes, we have to pursue excellence in all we do. Okay. But again, by these 3 renunciations, it is because if you see again, going back to Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam, all this is for the inhabitation of the Lord. And if you see the work of Lord or feminine material energy, there are maybe, I'm told, some 1,000 species of flowers. Each one is so distinct, but each one is perfect in itself. You cannot better it. If you apply the Fibonacci sequence in the sunflower, it will fit completely. So mountains or rivers or trees, the fractals, physics is trying to understand nature. There are tessellations in nature. There is symmetry in nature. There is beauty. There is perfection. So the Mahasaraswati aspect of the Divine Mother, is perfection in works. So yes, we have to seek perfection, do the highest that we want to do. But again, not that we will be patted in the back, or not that we will get a raise, because there is no other way to do it for us, because that is how the Lord does it. But these three renunciations of the fruit, of how it has to be done, and of instrumentation, these are the three stages of renunciation.
Thank you so much.
Yes, so Mr. Banerjee has asked this whole Adam Smith economics and Vedanta. So I think it's already for all to see, what Adam Smith's economics has done to the world and earth. The recent Glasgow summit, where we are reeling under climate change, and we know where it has taken us. This whole economic theory of competition and all. So there is now more and more talk of cooperation, of collaboration, and of reducing our wants and needs. And so this is an interesting question, that is competition aligning with Vedantic principle, right? If that's the essence of your...
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So there is a concept called Swadharma, again in the Gita and Upanishad. It is, what am I uniquely? What is my Swadharma? And that uniqueness is something which only you have and nobody else has it. The reason that we are separate, that you are born as Ujjwal and I'm born as Gitanjali, is because there's something that I am which only I can do, and something that only you can do. So actually there is no room for competition, because I can't be you and you can't be me. But essentially we are the same, and we are manifesting that same essence so beautifully. So we are like a jigsaw puzzle. We don't need to compete for that slot, but we need to fit in together. So the whole problem with all this stress and all of that is we are trying to be somebody else, and this whole paradigm is actually flawed, I would say, and it is on many fronts for us to see. We are not the wellness of individuals, to the wellness of earth, to the wellness of environment, everything is under question. So yes, it is not in line with Adam Smith's, this is not in line with the Vedic principles. But having said that, there is something called Matsya Nyaya. There is a concept, the justice of the fish. So the big fish eats the small fish. And it is not wrong, because that fish has to survive. But it is okay at the Matsya level, kingdom consciousness level. But we have now come to a level of human beings, and we are all actually complementary, and we don't need to swallow each other to exist. We can learn to shine and reflect our own uniqueness.
Sure.
And it is true even in the corporate world. Each company has to find its best that it has to do, and it can coexist with the other. Each company, at the company level also, there has to be a swadharma, yeah. And the companies that shut down or are not able to do is maybe they are not following their swadharma, they're trying to copy somebody else.
Actually, I wanted to ask that in the second sloka, we have a word Nanyatito asti na karma. So what is the meaning of this expression Nanyatito asti?
Yeah.
And in the third one, I have a confusion about this word tamsa vrita.
Yeah.
Can you please explain these two?
Yeah, so tamas is obscurity, avrita is covered. So they go to worlds which are sunless and covered with darkness and obscurity. That is the third one. The second one is that anyathetostis, this is the only way and not otherwise, that karma will not attach to man.
Okay.
That only when you are working but without a desire, and not otherwise, will karma not attach to man.
And ma'am, in the first one, there is a phrase, Bhunjitha ma grida.
Yeah.
So what does this phrase means?
Yeah, so bhunjitha is enjoy. So enjoy all.
Okay.
Tyaktena bhunjitha is by renouncing, enjoy all. Ma gridha, ma is do not, it is a negative participle. Gridha is to hold on. So do not hold on or possess or hoard, with dhanam, other people's wealth, or kasyas with, whose wealth is it anyway? Don't hold on to this possession, because whose it is anyway, it is yours when you grow into Isha. So better to have it as Isha than to hoard it as Anisha. Because you cannot hoard it as Anisha, because it is all changing in this changing world and you keep on hoarding and you cannot do it.
Thank you, ma'am.
So thank you so much. And we will resume again at 9 a.m. tomorrow. There is a comment here from Lokesh that we can take it up in the subsequent session, this question that how do we bring up a child that is naturally born pure? That's the question. And what you have asked here, Lokesh, is the whole practice of spirituality, how to discern the true from the false, and it is not black and white. So how do we learn to discern, and how do we even today it is more at the mental level, there's so many narratives. What is the truth? It's so difficult to know. That is the whole purpose of growing in consciousness. So thank you so much. I see raised hands. What do we do, Sneha?
I think if you have time, then whoever has questions can stay back and others can maybe leave. If you have time to address their questions.
Okay, so who, somebody raised hands.
Yes, Satya here.
Yes, Satya, please.
For me, like desire itself is a motivation, desire to achieve something. At a professional level, if we say, my desire is to become the best CEO. Maybe I will help as a CEO. I have this compassion, empathy, and my bigger purpose is to uplift the people around me. But is that desire? How do you achieve that goal or desire without getting attached?
Okay, so you have brought a very fine discernment between what we call desire and aspiration. So these are very two different movements of the being. And how do we differentiate what is in me desire and what is aspiration, or need? So aspiration is a need of the being, So the very good test for it is that if you are not getting what you wish, and you are getting hassled or anxious or stressed, then it was a desire. But if it is true aspiration or need, then even if you fail 100 times, you will have the patience to get up the next morning and start working on it. So that is what will yourself you can distinguish whether being the best CEO is a desire or an aspiration. So, yeah. And this is not just in this, but in anything we can apply this test. That is it a need of the being, my true aspiration, or is it a desire?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we will stop here today, and thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed the session, and try to reflect this during the day today and look at everything as to be inhabited by Isha. When you pick up your mobile to call, think there is Isha, this is Isha, the whole, as somebody said that we are drenched in, Brahman all the time. And like the earth is drenched after monsoons. So we are actually drenched in that consciousness. So just be open to that till we meet again tomorrow. See you. Thank you. Stay.
Swati here has one question, if we can take that last.
Okay, Swati.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to know that how to go in that state of mind of that freedom of desire, attachment, greed, jealousy. So in everyday life, every moment how to be in that state, so we can do it easily without being conscious that we don't have to behave like this. So how to come on that state?
Yeah. So first, everything starts with an understanding, because for human beings, mind is the highest instrument that we have. So everything starts with an understanding, and then we reflect it and implement it. So during the day, there are many occasions when we experience these emotions, of wanting something so badly, or jealousy, all that you spoke about. And if we quickly connect with what we studied today, that this is a reflection of a ego-centered life, because it's the ego that gets hurt. The soul or Atman is always one with everybody. It does not feel jealous with anybody. So one can remind oneself that this is an egocentric, life, and such a life takes us to sunless worlds that are covered with darkness, and that is not where we want to be. So we can shift slowly our this thing, and the understanding that we can dwell into these things. This is like a different topic altogether, but jealousy, for instance, psychologically has roots in inferiority complex, or yeah. So as long as we are not stationed in our dharma, swadharma, if I am doing what I'm best at and I'm enjoying and loving it, I will not feel jealous of anybody, or I will not feel this thing. So just to be centered again and again, to find out what unique thing I'm here to express, and to be focused on that. And that is the best way, as Ayakoka says, just be focused on your own growth, because
All
you
right.
have found a path. It is such a beautiful gift we have. Nobody can take it away from us. Even if somebody puts it in a prison, nobody can take that freedom of us to grow in our consciousness. It's such a beautiful gift of life.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Okay, take care, everybody. Bye. Namaste.
Namaste. Bye. Take care.